I think one of my greatest findings was I worked in schools for 25 years every day, and I'd go to IP meetings and nobody spoke the same language. No one on the team. It was really difficult to interact. That's when I realized it needed to be a team-based model. It couldn't just be the teacher and the instructional assistant. Everybody needed to be involved in it.
And it is replicable because it's built on a mountain of evidence-based practices, best practice procedures. So you don't even have to really think about what your instructors need to know. That has already been done for us.
Welcome. Today we are joined by Vicci Tucci, the developer of the Competent Learner Model, and Cathy Scutta, who is the director of the CLM Center of Excellence. Let's learn a little bit more about Vicci and Cathy. Vicci, why don't you go first and tell us a little bit about you?
Well, I started, almost 4 decades ago, developing the Competent Learner Model. And thank goodness I ran into that Cathy Scutta, because she certainly helped me over the years make it successful. I remember when I first started, Dr. Jerry Shook said, "You've got to meet this Cathy Scutta." She'll implement it in Pennsylvania. So she ended up getting access to a kit, and the word goes that she actually stayed up all night looking through it, and that she was real excited about it. This is all I do is continue to develop it. Nowadays, I'm pretty much semi-retired most of the time, most days.
As Vicci said, I met Vicci when I was actually working at Patton in Pennsylvania, and I was working, leading the autism initiative, and really was overwhelmed thinking about how could we bring resources to all of the schools in Pennsylvania that would be beneficial and that would have a training component. And so was very overwhelmed by that, and accidentally stumbled upon Vicci Tucci's work, who really in her hub on the West had not really implemented the model outside of her own 100-mile radius in her business and in contracts with schools and regional programs. Luckily, happily, stumbled upon the Competent Learner Model and was fortunate enough to actually have Vicci Tucci, the developer, train me, so she was my coach, and I was able to work at the Vista School with the director at the time there. And that was our first location where we implemented. So it was almost a pre-pilot. And then that's in 2003-04, and I've been replicating that implementation ever since. I came in-house with Tucci around 5 years ago, and really was kind of charged with developing the infrastructure of support for all CLMers anywhere in the world. So as it's grown in different locations, so that's what I do now. I work with the global implementations.
Okay, Vicci, to give our listeners a little more information, what was the impetus for the creation of the Competent Learner Model?
Well, I had just finished graduate school and I got a job. Ended up with 13 students that had just come out of the state hospital or were living in the community. And I ended up with a stack of paper and 12 pencils. That's all I had to work with in an abandoned jail. So fortunately, there was a library across the street. The principal, after a few months, and said, if you have any adults that could benefit from the program's education for adults, send them up here. We'll take them on. Of course, he'd never visited, so he didn't know what I was up against at all. But I thought, gosh, they have to become competent in so many things. And that's really how it got started, was I started producing readers and adults that could deal with math and things like that. But then I had students one came in a fetal position, literally, sat at a table with her legs crossed in the seat. And I was there by myself, as you can imagine. So that's where the concept came from. I needed to get them prepared to be educated better. And so I started isolating the repertoires based on Skinner's verbal and nonverbal operants.
You just mentioned the repertoires. Will you let the audience know what those 7 repertoires are?
Okay. The main one for me is that participator, getting them to work across the 4 instructional conditions: teacher-directed, semi-directed, peer-directed, and non-directed. The observer repertoire, which is really critical, that has to do with actually learning to imitate other things that people do and able to label things, the names of them, whether it's actions or objects or so forth and so on. The reader repertoire, just at a basic level, where they learn to sustain sounds. I was very involved with Engelman's work, so I was wanting to get them ready for reading mastery and language for learning. So my curricula were geared toward getting them ready for those. He called them programs, but they were really, to me, curricula. The listener repertoire, and help me, Cathy, the problem solver. Both in a social context, they needed to learn to ask for what they wanted, but also in the physical environment where they needed to manipulate things to get them to work. It was really essential. And what am I missing, Cathy?
The writer.
The writer repertoire. Is that all 7 now? I think
so, yeah.
So, Cathy, we see CLM being used a lot with students diagnosed with autism. Is that all it really supports, or does it support other struggling learners?
Sure. I personally think who are missing the repertoires. So any of the repertoires. So we're using it in some locations with our kindergartners who across the entire group, where we're just teaching them how to be better participators. Students who have, kind of emotional support needs, students who are physically involved. We may not be able to use every single one of the repertoires in those circumstances, but we still can use many of them. And the training component of the model is useful for all instructors. It builds behavioral educators, really brings best practices to whatever your role is. So if, as my background as an OT, it makes me a better OT. It makes teachers better teachers. It makes behavior analysts better behavior analysts. It really is helpful in that way.
Yeah, I was surprised when I was told by some of the BCBAs that Cathy was working with that they were things they had never learned in school based on certain units that they went through. And it amazed me because I developed it for the instructional aides, because those were the ones that served the children in most cases. So to find out that BCBAs did not, for instance, Unit 7, really prepares you to condition things to have value or change the value of, negative stimuli, like instruction, teacher-directed conditions. So it was shocking to me. And so I'm thrilled that it's being taught at Clarion, along with the other things that BCBAs need to learn.
Just a little side note, Clarion is my alma mater.
Is it?
I was a Golden Eagle.
Yeah.
Great. I love those people at that university.
Amazing.
They teach they even teach direct instructional content.
And I love that Clarion's doing it because, back in the early days of universities, Clarion was a teacher college. Before they got all the other disciplines in there, it was basically known for a teacher college. So, and that's why I went there. It's a great place.
Well, so 2 things have come to my mind listening to both Cathy and Vicci. So the first thing that I thought either one of you could talk to us about is when somebody is implementing the competent learner model. Vicci mentioned direct instruction. So one of the things that we have in CLM are those direct instruction lesson plans. So does one of you kind of want to talk about, like you assess students and then you can put them in the CLM curriculum?
Yes, well, the little bit that I have to say about it is that I studied Engelman's work since when I started learning about it. And it became clear to me that I needed a placement test. I needed to figure out exactly where the children needed to start in in the curricula. And so that was a critical piece for me to discover. And so far, it's worked pretty well, I would say. Wouldn't you, Cathy? That we know pretty much within 2 or 3 lessons where they are in the CLM curricula.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big differences with the competent learner model is that it comes with a true curricula and that it's designed in a track-based curricula, and that as Vicci said, it's not an exact science, but it is. The placement test does get us pretty close to the just right instructional level. And then knowing that the curriculum really dissects like schedules of reinforcement across the instructional conditions, you can then use it in conjunction with other curricular resources and other content area. It's, a content neutral curricula, which is what is so valuable. You can use it, embed it with anything that you're doing, no matter the age, no matter the ability level, or even content area. It could be used wherever.
Perfect. Talk a little bit about what is the longer assessment piece, which we call the Competent Learner Repertoire Assessment, or CLRA for short.
Well, the importance of that is to basically report it in IEP from year to year, exactly how progression has occurred for the learner. It really is designed such that it's the end of each track. So if you look at the participator teacher directed, the last lesson is the final track, which is the CLRA item. And there are 5 levels. There's a pre-1, 1, 2, 3, 4 in terms of the CLRA. People try to use it as a monthly assessment, but they need to look at it in terms of its long-term information tool, so to speak, for what the accomplishments have occurred for each learner. So they get to start the effects that the curricula has on the learner's performance. And so that chart, I think, helps in IEP meetings.
How does CLM different from other resources like your VB Maps or your Essentials for Living?
I think most the big difference is that CLM is a package of instructional tools. It's not just an assessment. We do have the assessment. We have multiple assessment components. We have the CLRA, what we were talking about. We have the placement test. We have reinforcer survey. We have, lots of assessment components to the model. But then we have the curricula, which, is kind of embeds that track-based scope and sequence of skills and all of the ABA and direct instruction precision teaching methods into the formats. So there's that, which the VB Map, Essentials for Living, other really valuable resources that exist out there are often just assessments. They don't have the teaching piece matched with the assessment. So there's that. And then finally, the third big component is the staff training and coaching component that is standardized, it's manualized, and now we have mechanisms for supporting people no matter where they are in the world. No other programs really have that. People go out, like the VB Map, Mark Sundberg goes out and does kind of workshops. And Vicci decided years ago that she wanted to bring people to mastery. She wanted people to be really able to use them to interact, and the skills that they need to interact with the students. So to me, the big difference is that it has all of these different components. It's not just an assessment, and it's not reliant on somebody else's ability to write a program for the child, because she's already done that content analysis and done the hard work of creating the curriculum and validating it, which took her 8 years to do. So none of us is going to really do curriculum development to that degree and that level of specificity that Vicci put into, kind of designing it.
Yeah, the coaching piece was huge for me, knowing that if I had questions, I could contact Carrie. She was with me in the classrooms. We practiced. So huge component that makes it so successful.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever published the research in any of my products, but there was a study done decades ago that if you attend a lecture, a talk of some sort, you might apply 5% of what you learn from that interaction. But if you make sure that someone can apply what they've learned, 95% of what they've learned will be applied. That was a huge number for me. It was like, how could I do it any differently? And I was a student, so to speak, of PSI, Personalized Systems of Instruction. So I was fortunate enough to land on the best people. Now I'm really involved with bringing about training and fluency. I have 3 new units that I have posted. I will be posting on that. So I'm always lucky enough to learn the best evidence-based practices.
So Cathy and Vicci, you've mentioned about training and coaching and professional development. Let's talk a little bit more about the professional development piece in the competent learner model, because it is a little bit different for the audience who may have more familiarity with something like the VB map or, any of these other kinds of things, essentials for living or pivotal response training. So if you just talk a little bit about how we go about training.
So we have the CLM course of study, which is the content that Vicci developed over small units of study that teaches best practices and also teaches how to use the tools. And so the way the training works is that you go through the course of study content on your own, by yourself. You log online and you do that. And then you have a coach who is assigned to you. It's kind of your person who is your facilitator of your learning. They're there to help you apply what you've learned with your students. And you have to check out. Basically, you have to master what's been taught in that unit so that you can move on to the next unit. And so the coach is your guide through the learning. And so there are many units. It takes several years to get through all of the units and really to have firm mastery of using all of the components of the model. So that's kind of the basic way that we do training. But we also now have certificate programs that we teach online so that we have other options for people who don't have a coach on site with them. Now we have ways in which we can support them virtually and through sometimes, pairing them up with somebody a coach who might be close by regionally, but not work for the same entity.
One of the structures that we've used in the competent learner model over the years is having, like what you're describing, maybe an external coach. In this case, it could come from the intermediate unit, or it could be somebody in a district who is a certified coach. But then on site in a particular building or a couple buildings over a district, they would also have a coach. So you have a tiered approach to that coaching and learning. Is that a fair way to say that?
That is perfect, Carrie Kessler. A coach, a certified coach, and a coach in training, and that we are all build in-house capacity, whatever the entity is. So we are in private schools, clinic-based situations in other locations in the world. And that's the first thing that we try to do is determine who will be left behind when we no longer are coaching them. We want them to have the expertise to keep this going and do it well with fidelity.
Yeah, and Cathy's done a wonderful design of how to get the programming in place. Like, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, they have 60 classrooms in one building which to me is unbelievable. And you're training 5 coaches now?
6.
Is it 6? Yeah.
6. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to implement the model. And she amazes me in terms of what she does, but that's the beginning component of all this, is to get those coaches prepared to provide the supervision that's necessary and provide it in a way that's enjoyable. Do you find it supportive, the coaching model, in that way?
As a coach, as a certified coach for CLM, yes, I would say that the model is wonderful, because my story for CLM is that I was hired to be an IU TAC consultant. And so in that role, my first day was spent in Harrisburg meeting Cathy Scutta and other patent folks to learn about CLM. And I was like fresh out of the classroom. And, so having Jane and Donna as my coaches in those early years was fabulous, because I had a lot to learn. And Vicci, when you talk about your course of study, and Cathy talked about it, that was a lot of behavior for me. The language, hearing it, it's Skinner. We learn if we take, courses towards our BCBA or things like that. And so it's very rich in language, and it supports that idea that you spoke about earlier. It makes you a better teacher, a better coach, a better OT, or, whoever's role is learning that. It levels the playing field because everybody hears the same message. So yes, the design does support your knowledge, whatever role you have in CLM.
Yes. I think one of my greatest findings was I worked in schools for 25 years every day. Well, Monday through Friday. I was in a classroom, and I'd go to IEP meetings, and nobody spoke the same language. No one on the team. It was really difficult to interact, and I had to be careful to not correct anybody. So that's when I realized it needed to be a team-based model. It couldn't just be the teacher and the instructional assistant. Everybody needed to be involved in it.
Cathy, the CLM Center of Excellence is a newer creation to help support CLM. Can you tell us a little more about it, what its purpose is, and how it actually supports and sustains CLM through your coaching?
Sure. So the Competent Learner Model Center of Excellence is a division of Tucci. So it lives inside of Tucci Learning Solutions and so its main mission is to promote and support global CLM dissemination. So the way we do that is to standardize. We have kind of 6 key areas that we work on, and we connect people and resources from around the world. So we work with professional development. So things like webinars, we might do like a BCBA roundtable, or we might bring people together around a specific topic. And these are free opportunities. They're open to people outside of the CLM community. And we just bring people together and do various professional development activities. We have certificate programs. So there is a key function where we are creating and designing the actual syllabi, meeting the standards for accreditation from different accrediting bodies, working with universities and creating these affiliation agreements and partnerships with our university programs. The third main function is licensing and certification. So we have now standardized our licenses so that organizations can use all components of the model inside their own organizations. We have a professional license for people that are in private practice that maybe want to use CLM components. We have a training lab license, which allows like an IU to train outside of their own programs. So we've standardized that structure, and then our certification structure. So we now certified instructors and coaches, and we have a process and program for certifying coordinators so that, like Carrie went through, it's a 4 or 5 course sequence where manage a larger implementation. Then we also provide this background infrastructure for, we call it our Licensed Resource Center, so that our coaches and everybody else has the same training resources. They have supplemental PowerPoints, supplemental trainings, video library, just an entire infrastructure of resources so that when you're out there training somebody, if you need some supplemental videos to go along with Course of Study Unit 2 to demonstrate, well, what would this format look like for a child that's in a wheelchair? You can literally go onto that resource center and look for formats for kids who have multiple disabilities. So you will find all of those supplemental resources. The 5th is research. So I sit on a lot of dissertation committees. I try to connect people and ideas around research. I know and have archived what research has been done, not published, and unpublished dissertations, things that we've done, presented at conferences. And we have that archived. And so we try to connect all of our implementers with the research that has been done. And we try to encourage replication of that. So, and then the last function is community. We want everybody from wherever you are in the world to feel like a CLMer. This is Vicci. This is all her. You know, she created a family within the Tucci organization, and her desire was to create nations of competent learners. And that meant she wanted a true community of users. And we talk about, you know, kind of professional learning communities, but I have never experienced a true professional learning community until I started working with CLM. And that's truly that's the last function, that we want people, we bring our coaches together from around the world. We let them create the agenda. We try to create this atmosphere of trust and connection, no matter where you are in the world. Those are the 6 key functions of the Center of Excellence.
Perfect. Thank you, Cathy.
Pretty amazing, huh?
It is way more than amazing. It's very, very cool for sure. So thinking about, you know, informing more of our districts about competent learner model, as you know, administrators come and go, and so part of the idea here with the podcast is, you know, giving people more information of things that they may not be aware of, right? That there are other options possibly for some of their students with disabilities. So why should a district administrator, a special ed supervisor, director of special ed, a building principal, think about considering using CLM, and what supports would they kind of need to commit to, would they have to think about in terms of then doing CLM in their district?
Well, the first thing that comes up for me is that study that I talked about in terms of making sure that people can apply, that instructors, no matter what discipline they're functioning from, can apply what they learn. To me, that's probably one of the most critical things that administrators need to look at. But the other thing is that I was real focused after having worked in school districts for so long every day. People didn't like what they were doing. They were oftentimes very frustrated because they didn't have the competencies. They weren't taught how to teach a lot of the learners. So they were, unfortunately, a lot of the times taking it out on the learners. You know, I don't know if that's true all over the world, but that's what I came up against in California. They were expelling students for things that were kind of ridiculous. I had this one case where this child was in 6th grade, and every time they called on him to read in front of the whole class, he would pop some kid next to him, you know, in the face or somewhere. They had no idea that he did not know how to read, you know, no concept of that. That to me was something that administrators need to learn about. Their staff may not be happy with what they're doing, and they need to understand the importance of that they know how to be successful with their learners. The other thing is that because not only did I make sure that the teachers went through, but the instructional aides went through the same course of study. You could look into a classroom, you wouldn't know who the teacher was. And to me, that was critical. And you may want to add to that, Cathy.
No, I think that is number one. It's a team-based model and it is replicable. So we have such high turnover in our school systems. That's why they should consider this, because it's built on a mountain of evidence-based practices, best practice procedures that are built into this. And so you don't even have to really think about what your instructors need to know. That has already been done for us. So I think adopting it for the purposes of making sure you have good, valid training, you have a good instructional program that works, and you have implementation tools to help you be able to sustain it over time. But anybody who cares about challenges that we are having with learners who are having all kinds of significant challenges, behavioral, learning, emotional, we should be thinking about kind of this package is something that could help us.
You know, I have to tell you a little bit about down in Southern California. We started implementing a few years ago, and it was very successful across 3 classrooms. And recently, one of the instructional assistants became in charge of, I don't know what the committee is called, but he talked the administration into bringing us in again. This is instructional assistant, because he loved the competent learner model. And he had gone around to different classrooms where it wasn't being implemented. And he begged them to bring us back, and we're going back in. You know, now that's an instructional assistant who has seen the value of the model, not only for the kids, but for the staff, you know, his colleagues that he works with. And to me, that was a big win to have that happen.
So listening to both of you and Cathy, and when you were explaining about commitment, it just makes me think of what we see here in Pennsylvania, in particular in Montgomery County, is that our districts have made really strong commitments to multi-tiered systems of support, whether it's to address the academics at the 3 tiers, or we do a lot of PBIS, so the positive behavior and intervention support system. Would you say that it's fair for a district taking on something like the competent learner model to think about the things you do in MTSS needing to be like the commitments to CLM as well?
First of all, you know, the model, it has component parts that can be used within an MTSS. Really, once you have a certified coach who really understands all the components, that person then is key in helping the administrator to determine this would be a good use of this data collection tool. It might be a top of the triangle kind of kid that appears to be doing self-injurious behavior. Let's pull out some of these tools and, let's take some participation data and let's use this. When is this occurring, not occurring? So a certified coach becomes the guide for how to take this enormous package of tools and apply them to where they can best fit and be helpful in an MTSS. We years ago aligned it with PBIS. It absolutely aligns with PBIS. I mean, again, PBIS doesn't give you a curriculum. So when you talk about that you talk about universal supports, maybe all kindergarten or all teachers get a training on the 3 key ways to use reinforcement. Everybody can benefit from that. That's a universal strategy. But then how about if we have the curriculum itself may be best utilized for our most naive learners to receive a lot of extra supports. So, pulling it apart has been really the work of the last, 10 years.
I don't know what it's like in Pennsylvania, but out here, the administrators never walk into a classroom. they have no concept of what's going on, which amazes me and concerns me very much, because I know there's a district or an ICU that's got a new administrator, and that person has decided they're not going to use the CLM. And the staff's suffering tremendously from it, and they're sneaking in curricula and other things, and they're devastated. So I just can't imagine, what that's like for an organization that's had the advantages of using the CLM.
Cathy, from a district standpoint, many of our districts in our region have refocused their commitment to more on diversity and equity and inclusion, as well as social and emotional learning. How does CLM support these very important initiatives at this time?
The first 7 lessons support building a strong participator, making sure that we are conditioning ourselves and everything in the value. And we talk about some of our learners who are so vulnerable because of their home environments, because of a variety of social and emotional challenges, how vulnerable they are. They need us to be partners in their learning, no matter what. We try to, in our webinar series, we try to address local initiatives and make sure that we are aligning. We are helping our CLM coaches and educators learn how to align some of these other commitments, equity and inclusion. We've been using components of this model to support that for years. So it's nothing new for us. So wherever the kids are, we can use the model.
And I think our last question for today would be, if one of the districts or schools in our county wanted to learn even more about the Competent Learner Model after listening to the podcast, how do they get more information?
Here you go.
You
Kat.
visit many of our websites. Obviously, you can always go to the Tucci website itself and find information about CLM. The CLM Center of Excellence website was really designed with that description of what is CLM, what are the core components. After you find somebody, and we really developed it with you in mind, all of our coaches in the field, so that you didn't have to, let me find this material. So first step is send them there. Second step is, sit with them, answer questions, show some of the information. We have several videos of Vicci describing how she got started, describing what the work is. Sometimes that's helpful. We try to use Vicci's story, the story of families who've been impacted, the stories of educators who've been impacted by the model. So we have lots of different tools on the various websites that help you to kind of get that conversation going.
One of the greatest things I think that was ever developed was the case study video in Pennsylvania that was done by the Department of Education. It truly demonstrates the power of the CLM. Because you get to see, Cathy got it set up so that you see elementary, but then you see the older kids going through the model with their staff. You get to see the before and after in a year's time. The differences that you can make in such a short period of time are beyond belief, even for me. It's magical. And so that's up on our website, Tucci Learning Solutions.
And it's also on the CLM page. So it's on the Competent Learner Model page, the case studies and memorable parents around the world. Just lots of really good resources there for people to explore.
Perfect.
This has been enjoyable, by the way.
It's what?
It's been an enjoyable event today.
Oh, well, thank you. And I so appreciate you both doing this with Brandon, Carol, and I. I always learn more every time I get to hear you guys talk about CLM and the different things. So we just really appreciate your time with us today on behalf of our school districts.
Thank you. And may I mention that Cathy's planning with other colleagues the CLM conference for 2022 coming up sometime in June, hopefully, at Clare University.
That's right. We were going to do Clarion last year, but something like COVID hit. And so we won't talk about that. But okay, so June 2022, CLM conference.
Absolutely.
Clarion University.
Hopefully. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for inviting us to do this. We really, we really appreciate it, Carrie and Carol and Brandon. Thank you.